Profit is worth more than the cure. One of the world's largest investment banks asked a shocking question in 2018. Goldman Sachs questioned whether curing patients would be a sustainable business model. In other words, is it financially worthwhile to eliminate diseases for good? In this video, you will discover why the market often prefers continuous treatments instead of definitive cures. You will also see how science is advancing so rapidly that it can completely change this scenario. But there's something even more disturbing behind this question that will leave you outraged. The cruel logic of the medical market. The Goldman Sachs report revealed an uncomfortable truth. Therapies that cure at once create a problem for pharmaceutical companies' financial revenue. When the patient is cured, they stop buying medications. This represents a disaster for the industry. The company Gilead developed a revolutionary drug against hepatitis C. This medicine cured more than 90% of cases. It didn't just treat, but completely cured. Hepatitis C can evolve into cirrhosis and liver cancer. However, something unexpected happened with sales. They plummeted from $12 billion in 2015 to less than $4 billion in 2018. The reason was simple. There were no more sick people to treat. Additionally, cured patients no longer transmitted the disease. When a product works too well and cures, it literally self-destructs. Chronic treatments guarantee predictable monthly revenue. Definitive cures eliminate this cash flow along with the disease. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's the cold logic of the market transforming illnesses into profitable products. Companies need to answer to investors who demand financial predictability. When spreadsheets show that chronic patients yield more than cured patients, priorities shift. Doctors and researchers work hard seeking cures, but the system where they operate has completely different incentives. However, there's a true story that proves this machine can be defeated. The tragedy that generated a medical revolution. Dr. Carl June was a brilliant American immunologist. In the 1990s, his team developed techniques to reactivate the body's defense cells. Initially, the goal was to combat the HIV virus. In 1995, his life changed forever. Cindy June, his wife, was diagnosed with cancer. She went through all available conventional treatments, chemotherapy, surgeries, but nothing worked. Access to experimental therapies was extremely difficult at that time. She passed away. This loss completely transformed Carl June's life mission. On Cindy's deathbed, he made a solemn promise, swearing to himself and to his wife that he would find the cure for cancer. He abandoned clinical practice and dedicated himself entirely to developing revolutionary therapies. That's how CAR-T therapy was born, one of the most revolutionary technologies in modern medicine. But how exactly does this technology work? The genius behind CAR-T therapy. Dr. June's idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Collect the patient's own defense cells, teach them to recognize the tumor, and return them to the body. They would then attack the cancer with surgical precision. It's like training soldiers from your own army. They learn to recognize every characteristic of the enemy. Then they return to the battlefield with absolute knowledge. These modified cells are called CAR-T cells. It means chimeric antigen receptor T cells. June began testing on mice. The results were promising. Then he advanced to human trials. He received funding from the National Institutes of Health of the United States to treat about 100 patients. But then something devastating happened in 2008. The crisis that almost destroyed hope. The stock market plummeted in the United States. The housing bubble exploded, causing the subprime crisis. Ironically, Goldman Sachs was one of the main actors in this financial crisis. The bank sold high-risk assets while betting against those same assets. The National Institutes of Health had to drastically cut resources. The money that would be used for 100 patients was reduced to little more than 10. In medical research, this means not having a sufficient sample to prove efficacy. But in 2010, 15 years ago, came the first concrete proof, the first documented miracle. Bill Ludwig had leukemia, an extremely aggressive blood cancer. He went through all types of available chemotherapy. Nothing worked. His days were numbered. Dr. June, seeing the severity of the case, decided to try the experimental therapy. He collected Ludwig's defense cells, trained these cells in the laboratory to attack cancer, then re-injected them into the patient. The result was extraordinary. Complete remission. Cure of a disease that had no more treatment options. It was the first definitive sign that the technology worked in terminal adults. The second patient was also cured. The third equally. Fourth, fifth, all showing complete remission. Until in 2012 came the case that would change everything. The girl who proved that miracles exist. Emily Whitehead was only 6 years old. She suffered from acute lymphoblastic leukemia, one of the most aggressive types of blood cancer. She had already been through chemotherapy several times. The cancer always returned. Doctors informed her parents that there were no more options. Emily was dying. The parents learned about the CAR-T cures and contacted Dr. June. Dr. June had lost his wife to cancer. He had a daughter. Despite only testing on adults, the parents' suffering convinced him. Emily received her own modified cells. Initially, everything seemed to work perfectly. But a few days later, something terrible happened. When the cure almost became fatal, the modified cells were working, but working too much. Emily's body entered cytokine storm, a massive inflammatory reaction that was destroying her internal organs. Extremely high fever, blood pressure plummeting, organs beginning to fail. Emily was placed in an induced coma. Doctors no longer knew what to do. Dr. June began writing apology emails, one to the National Institutes of Health sponsoring the experiment, another to the parents. There was no more hope. His therapy was going to kill such a young child. But then came an unexpected idea. The coincidence that saved a life. The intensive care unit team identified something crucial. A substance called interleukin-6 was spiking in Emily's body. This was the cause of all the devastating inflammation. By an extraordinary coincidence, Dr. June's daughter had rheumatoid arthritis. He knew there was a medication blocking exactly this substance. The drug was called tocilizumab. It was used for arthritis. It had never been tested in this situation. There were no studies, authorization, or guarantees. But there was a 6-year-old girl dying. The team met. The question was simple: risk it or stand still. They decided to risk it. They applied tocilizumab and waited. Hours later, the fever began to subside. Pressure stabilized. Exactly on her 7th birthday, Emily woke from the coma. When they did the tests, the cancer had completely disappeared. Emily was cured. What an extraordinary birthday gift. Before, she had suffered 16 months of heavy and ineffective chemotherapy. Now she was free from cancer. The most impressive part? She remains cured to this day, more than 12 years later. Emily showed the world that cure isn't utopia. It's concrete reality. Of the first 12 patients treated, something extraordinary happened. Results that shocked medicine. With limited funds, Dr. June managed to treat 12 patients initially. 9 of them achieved complete cure. This represents 75% success rate, including 2 children. All were terminal patients, with no other treatment options available. Results like these are extremely rare in medicine. This shocked the entire scientific community. But this revolution also reached Brazil. The Brazilian case that made history. Valberto, 64 years old, was facing an extremely aggressive lymphoma. The disease had already spread to his bones. It was in terminal phase. He could no longer walk. He lived on maximum doses of morphine. At the beginning of September, his body was practically taken over by tumors. All available treatments had been exhausted. He sought the clinical hospital of Ribeirão Preto. He would try something experimental in Brazil, unprecedented in Latin America. A genetic therapy conducted by a team linked to the University of São Paulo. The same CAR-T cell. The result was considered extraordinary. After treatment, he had rapid and surprising improvement. In October, Valberto was discharged. The condition was described as complete remission. Imaging tests showed the dramatic difference. Before, tumors appeared in black on the images. Afterwards, the same patient showed completely clean exams. At the time, he summarized with a powerful phrase. He wished that wouldn't be an exception. He wanted more people to have access to the same benefit. Unfortunately, shortly after, he passed away. But not from the disease. It was a domestic accident that caused severe head trauma. Nothing related to the therapy. But if it works so well, why isn't it available to everyone? The problem of access and cost. CAR-T therapy was approved by the FDA in 2017. This means it's not an experimental alternative. It's officially recognized treatment. But there's a serious problem: cost. It can cost $500,000 per treatment in the United States. Why is it so expensive? Because each treatment is completely personalized. These are the patient's own cells modified in the laboratory. It's not a mass-produced pill. It's precision medicine made to measure. In Brazil, researchers developed the same treatment for less than 500,000 reais. Remarkable Brazilian technology. But it's still very expensive. Progress exists, but access and price still limit massive impact. However, here comes the really encouraging news. Science is accelerating exponentially. Scientific advancement is gaining impressive speed. Artificial intelligence is shortening the time for discovering new drugs. Manufacturing platforms are growing rapidly. New methods are drastically reducing costs. Take human DNA sequencing as a baseline. The Genome Project cost $30 billion. This was in the 1990s until the 2000s. Today, sequencing a person's DNA costs $1,000. Some cases even $500. From 30 billion to 535 years. Research with CAR-T for solid tumors already exists, not just leukemias and lymphomas. They're testing for pancreatic, lung, breast cancer. Other genetic and cellular therapies are emerging. Diseases that were death sentences may have cures. The greedy may delay, but they can't stop progress. And what can people do today? Demanding transparency and access. First, information is power. Demand transparency about prices and access to treatments. Ask your doctor if there are new and more effective medications. Many doctors don't even mention drugs because they're expensive. A patient was being treated in São Paulo with a famous doctor. The treatment was correct, but the tests weren't perfect. Had some loose problems. He mentioned that he owned several farms. He was asked why he wasn't taking PCSK9 inhibitor, this revolutionary medication. He answered that no one had mentioned it. The drug cost 6,000 reais every 6 months. For a person with several farms, this was relatively little. The doctor should have given the option. If you want to buy, this exists. If not, we keep treatment as is. 3 months later, he returned with a huge smile. Blood tests showed LDL lower than expected. Lipoprotein A was at normal values. The injection was working perfectly. But access problems continue to exist. The barriers that doctors face. Last week, a patient needed a potent medication to reduce cholesterol, had 60% plaques in several arteries. Clear indication, high risk, strong scientific evidence. Either use the medicine or in less than a year would need cardiac surgery. Reports were filled out, forms justifying the obvious. The insurance company's response was, denied. This is reality. Doctors sometimes become hostages, need to maintain the same more or less effective treatment. When talking about access barriers, it's not theory. It's the daily routine of medicine. But let's get to the good part. The revolutionary new discoveries. Advances that are changing the game. In South Africa, 20% of the adult population has HIV, 1 in 5 adults. The country has the world's largest antiretroviral program. They're testing a revolutionary injectable medication, 1 injection every 6 months. It's almost 100% effective in preventing HIV. Prevention is always better than cure. Preventing a disease from happening surpasses trying to treat it later. There's a tuberculosis vaccine being tested, effective for all forms of the disease. Unlike BCG, which only protects severe forms, malaria vaccine is almost ready. CRISPR, a single injection to lower cholesterol, practically zeroing LDL. It doesn't help selfish executives writing reports, recommending not to cure, not to kill the golden goose. Let it keep laying eggs eternally. This goose is dying. Diseases will be cured. And it's happening now. The new era of personalized medicine. Diabetes already has cure cases in China. Creating pancreatic islets in laboratory, implanting in the patient, and perfectly controlling glycemia. CAR-T for solid tumors is happening now. CRISPR to lower cholesterol. Not with injection every 6 months, but with a single injection in a lifetime. Medicine is becoming more specific, more personalized. What's your disease? What's your genetic defect? What's your specific mutation? This is called precision medicine, individualized medicine. It's expensive but effective like no other therapy to date. That's why we need to support public research, policies that encourage cures instead of recurring treatments. The science train stops for no one. The market discovered that cure is also profit. Science advances at high speed. Anyone who dares to stand in front will be run over by history. And here comes the final devastating irony. Remember the Goldman Sachs report that opened this story? The one that asked if curing patients was a sustainable business model. Know how much the CAR-T therapy market moves today? More than $4 billion per year, growing 30% annually. In 2017, when it was approved, it was zero. Today, more than 40,000 patients worldwide have already received this therapy. The market discovered that cure also generates money, that saving lives can be extremely profitable, that science, when it advances, creates new billion-dollar markets. Greed tried to slow progress. But science won. It's so potent that it even bends the market. Emily Whitehead and renewed hope. Emily Whitehead was a 6-year-old girl without hope. Today she's an adult woman, completely cured, living her life, smiling. If that doesn't give you genuine hope, nothing else will. Science proved that the impossible is possible, that diseases considered death sentences can be defeated. That cure isn't just a distant dream, it's reality happening now. The future of medicine isn't in keeping people sick, it's in curing them definitively, and that future has already begun. The revolution is happening. You're witnessing history being made. Share this knowledge with those you love. Information can save lives. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates about the future of medicine.